Hey everyone, I am so excited to be able to kick off React Summit Remote Edition this year. Thank you so much for coming to my talk, which is all about internationalizing React applications. If we haven't had the chance to meet, my name is Daria Caraway. I'm currently a software engineer at Workday in Boulder, Colorado in the United States. I want to share with you a little bit about my experiences in life learning different languages. There are some embarrassing childhood photos coming, so don't make fun of me too much. I was born in Boulder, Colorado, where I learned English as a first language. This is the youngest photo of me that I could find. I'm also half Chinese, so from a pretty young age, I learned Mandarin. This is a photo of me at Chinese school where I would go every Sunday with my sister for many years. This photo cracks me up. When I got to grade 6, I got to pick a language to learn in school. I picked Spanish. So from grades 6 to 12, I studied Spanish, and by the end, I was pretty fluent. This is a photo of me in grade 7, braces and all. And so something that I've just learned throughout my life, besides maybe that I don't have to have bangs. Besides that, I learned that learning languages is pretty hard. I don't have a great memory, so memorizing vocabulary or grammar in different languages, it can be pretty difficult. Okay, so this is me now, and I am many years removed from grade 12. And to be honest, I've lost a lot of my Chinese and Spanish speaking skills. I can understand them pretty well, but my speaking, it's not great. And my Chinese reading is a solid 1 out of 10. And so I've learned, especially as I get older, that maintaining languages, even after you spend all that time learning them, it's also pretty hard. I don't have a lot of opportunities where I am to practice Spanish or practice Chinese anymore, so they kind of just got stored to like this back part of my brain that isn't easily accessible. At least that's what it feels like. But as I do as a software engineer, I draw parallels between my life and my code because that is totally normal. For the first time in my career, I'm on a team that has to support multiple languages and locales in our application. And I wonder if even though languages are hard for me to learn in life, is there a way that we can architect our React application so that adding and maintaining new languages doesn't have to be so bad? After all, I feel like teaching our apps to handle multiple languages should be easier than teaching our brains. At least that's my theory. But before we explore this theory, I want to level set some vocabulary. The first term that you might have seen around is internationalization, or I-18N. The abbreviation is such because there are 18 letters between the I and the N in the word internationalization, and I guess it's quite long to say. There are a lot of confusing definitions out there for internationalization. I found a bunch that were confusing to me while I was researching this talk. But I think that is the way that it is because internationalization can mean a lot of different things to different people, depending on what your application does, what industry you're in, what kind of standards you have to meet. But I like to think of internationalization as the process of architecting your application so that when localization occurs, things kind of just work. So then what is localization, or L10N? Localization is the process of actually making the content and experience of your application for a given locale. So internationalization is like architecting it, and then localization is actually changing it. So theoretically, if you've internationalized your app correctly, when localization occurs, you shouldn't have to do much. And there are a bunch of elements of localization. This is by no means an exhaustive list. And like I said, different applications are going to have different things that they have to worry about. You might have to implement some or all of these elements. It really just depends. And if you do have to implement all or some of those elements, there are some popular React libraries out there that are meant to be that like internationalization architectural solution. If you do have to support internationalization, I might suggest looking into one of these libraries to see if they fit your needs. But I thought it would be more fun in this talk to just build some of those internationalization architectures ourselves and maybe learn something new. And this is actually how my team does it currently. To help me demonstrate, I've made up a completely fake company called Sunset Central. You might tell that I really miss traveling because Sunset Central is a place where you can go and watch live streams of sunsets happening across the world. Again, I'm in Boulder, Colorado, which is in the Rocky Mountain region of the United States. I'm surrounded by mountains. It's really pretty, but I really miss traveling and like watching a sunset on the beach with like the waves and the salt water and the breeze. So I made up Sunset Central. On Sunset Central, you can like find the type of sunset you're looking for and then see a list of all of them, where they are, when they're happening, so that you can be sure to come back at the right time to watch it live virtually with a group of people. In my fake world where Sunset Central exists, many other people must also be missing traveling because it appears Sunset Central is gaining popularity in other markets outside of the United States. Looking at the metrics and talking to their users, Sunset Central decided that they want to expand to target Spanish speakers in Spain and Arabic speakers in Egypt. So the Sunset Central team put together a team of translation and locale experts because oftentimes the developers working on the project will not be those things. I am definitely not a translation or localization expert. The locale specialists for Sunset Central have identified these two locales that represent Spanish speakers in Spain and Arabic speakers in Egypt. Now, there are multiple different parts to a locale. If you've ever seen these like language strings, you'll see they are language, script, country, variant, which represents different dialogues of a given language, and extension, which includes different calendar and numeric systems. But oftentimes, or at least oftentimes, I've seen just one or two. Completely depends on the technology and what they've decided to support. Sunset Central here has decided for now, they're just going to support the language and country parts of these locales, which are Spanish speakers in Spain and Arabic speakers in Egypt. With all of this knowledge, the devs start working on internationalization for Sunset Central. So what kind of things does Sunset Central need to think about supporting? What kind of architectural solutions are we talking about here? Well, first thing I notice is the language. We're gonna have to support rendering text content in multiple languages. Right now, it's only in English. The second thing that I notice is these dates. As far as I know, these are pretty American dates. They go month, day, year, and then have the 12-hour formatted clock. So if we want these dates to be familiar and recognizable to people outside of the United States, we're going to have to do something about these. Lastly, Sunset Central is going to need to support bi-directional languages too, and I will explain a little bit later exactly what that means. So overall, these are the things that we're keeping in mind for internationalization: text translations, date formatting, and language directions. All right, cool. So the dev and translations teams have decided that it would be helpful if they structured their translations like this. You have a bunch of all of the locales. You have a key that doesn't change for every given string, and then the string value is the translated text for the different locales. So I speak English, so my keys are also in English, but basically we have these keys, they're the same in every locale, and they map to a given string that is the translated string in the different locales. And what do we do with these strings? So theoretically, any given component in the application is going to need access to these translations. So I think it makes sense to put them in a context. Here I've made a translations context. It stores the current locale, the translations map, and it returns a translate function. The translate function takes in one of those keys, it grabs the current locale, and it returns to you back the translated string for that locale that matches the key. Then I just created a plain custom hook at the bottom that gives you easy access to the translate function. Then in our component, here is the mountain sidebar item component. It is the mountain button in the sidebar. The mountain sidebar item can grab the translate function from the use translate hook, and then instead of just rendering a static string that says mountain in English, we're going to run the mountain key through the translate function. And if we do this for all of the strings in our entire application, when they all go through the translate function, all of the strings on the page, when the locale is set to Spanish speakers in Spain, should be translated to Spanish. And so this is looking pretty good. We've got everything translated, but there's still something funky about the Spanish locale, and that is the dates. So like I mentioned, I think these dates are super American, and they're not going to be very familiar for Spanish speakers in Spain. So how can we fix that? Now, there are a couple of date libraries out there that also support localization. The first one I want to talk about is actually not a library. It's just the JavaScript intl object, or intl. I'm going to call it intl. I don't really know what you call it. I'm going to call it intl. The JavaScript intl object has a bunch of different utilities for localization and a couple for date times. Now, JavaScript dates, they kind of have a reputation for not being like the easiest thing to work with, especially if you're doing a bunch of date math, maybe you're doing a bunch of date conversions, maybe you're dealing with multiple time zones. And so for that reason, a lot of people prefer to use a date library. Luxton and DateFNs are two date libraries that I've worked with in the past that also support localization. But Sunset Central doesn't have to do any date math. Right now, the server just returns a timestamp. That timestamp just needs to be rendered in the given locale in the current user's time zone, which is the JavaScript behavior by default. So we're going to go ahead and just use the JavaScript intl object. We can new up a intl date time format, pass it our current locale that I'm grabbing with a use locale hook from the context. Pass in all of the date options, which just tells it how you want to render the date format, or how you, we want the year, month, day, hour, and minute to all be numeric values. And then you call format, you pass it in your JavaScript date. Seemingly like magic, the dates are now just localized to Spanish speakers in Spain when we pass that in as a locale. We now have day, month, year, and the 24-hour clock, which will make a lot more sense if you're a Spanish speaker in Spain. And this is pretty cool. I think a lot of people, I surely didn't realize that the JavaScript intl object existed until recently, and it's pretty powerful, and you can get a lot of functionality out of it without having to use a library. Okay, now that Spanish is looking good, we have support for translations and dates. I want to take a look at our next locale, which is Arabic speakers in Egypt. Because of our work, the text is being translated, and the dates are looking right, but something is still not quite right. And if you're familiar with Arabic, it's because Arabic is actually a right to left language. And there's quite a few of these right to left languages out there. So what exactly does that mean? Well, in English, which is a left to right language, you start on the left, and when you type a word, you add characters to the right. Well, in Arabic, you start on the right and you add characters to the left, and you read your page content in that direction as well. So in English, you kind of start on the left of the page and you go and you consume content in that direction. Same in Arabic, you consume that content from right to left. And that means that we don't just need to flip the text, but the layout on the page also needs to change. Because if you want the user to start at the sidebar and read from the sidebar to the page content in left to right language, you're gonna have to flip it such that in a right to left language, you start at the sidebar on the right, you consume the sidebar, and then you consume the content on the page. And there are a couple of pretty handy things that we can do to make this work for Sunset Central. So the first one is to set the direction property on all of the elements in CSS that we want to flip. Now this is going to flip any non-direction specific CSS, like text, or maybe you're using Flexbox or CSS Grid. To use Flexbox as an example, say you have a Flex container that has a list of items in it, and you, in left to right, are numbering those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from the left to the right. Well, if you change the direction of that container to RTL, Flex is going to reverse it, and now you're going to have your items numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from right to left. And I'm realizing just now that my hands are backwards for you, but I think you get the idea. So if the CSS direction property flips any non-direction specific content, we can also use a CSS utility to flip any direction specific content. And by that, I mean things like padding right or border left. Anytime you specify a direction along the x-axis with right or left. And this is because, say you have some padding on the right because you have an element and you want there to be some space before the next element on the right. Well, you're going to have to flip it such that when you start on the left, you still have that padding to the left of it before the next element on the left. There are a couple of CSS utilities out there that can help out here. I've personally been using the RTL CSS JS utility by Ken C. Dodds. By the way, check out his session tomorrow at the same time. But I'm usually using this utility because my team currently is using JavaScript CSS objects with emotion. So this utility will take the CSS object and flip all of the direction specific pieces kind of automatically for us. And you don't have to be using CSS. No, you don't have to be using CSS in JS to make use of these utilities. There are utilities like this out there for any type of CSS solution that you're using. But I want to show you an example of how I've been using the RTL CSS JS utility. Well, first thing is we need to be able to access the direction from potentially anywhere, similar to the translation. So I made a theme context that stores the direction. Theme contexts are often used to store themes, like maybe if you have a light mode or a dark mode, you would put that in the theme context. And if you're using a design system like Material UI, you'll actually set the direction in the Material UI context in a similar way. So this is kind of an established pattern. In the context, I store the direction, and then I make a custom hook that gives you easy access to the direction. Then I made one more custom hook called use styles. Use styles grabs the direction from the context, and then it returns you a function, apply styles. Apply styles takes that CSS object that I was talking about, and if the direction is set to RTL, it'll run it through the CSS utility, RTL CSS JS, and the corresponding CSS object that is returned from the function will have all of those directions flipped. Then in our component, back to the mountain sidebar item component, we can grab the apply styles function from the use styles hook. And before I take my CSS object and pass it to emotion, which is what that CSS tag does, I'm going to run it through the apply styles function. And that's going to flip all of the direction specific CSS before passing it to emotion, before emotion turns it into real CSS. And if I do this for all of the styles on my entire page, now if we set the locale to Arabic speakers in Egypt, and we set the direction to right to left, the Sunset Central app is looking a lot better. We have everything translated. We have the dates localized, and we have this bidirectional format. And okay, I think this is pretty awesome because with not that much code, we've successfully internationalized Sunset Central. Now, when the localization team is ready to expand to 50 more locales and they give us all of the translations, as long as those locales are in the translation object and the JavaScript Intel API supports those locales, everything on the page is just going to work. So if we take a look back at what I interpret internationalization to mean, which is architecting your app so when localization occurs, things work as expected, I think we did meet our goal here. We can pass in however many locales and presumably it'll all be okay. So I've learned in my life that learning languages is hard, maintaining them is a little bit harder, and I hope in this short talk, though, you've learned that architecting your React application to support multiple languages in locales does not have to be so hard. Thank you so much. I'm excited and glad I got to kick everything off here today, and I hope you have a great time at the rest of the conference. Come find me at the Q&A right after this if you have any questions, or always, I'm on Twitter at Daria Caraway, and I have a link here that I will share that has a bunch of really great resources, blog posts, documentation for a lot of the content that I talked about in this talk. Thank you so much, and I'll see you all soon.